Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Dr. Terri Show. I have Bob Hamp in the studio again. We're continuing the conversation about the brain. And this time we're going to talk about how relationships and relational health impacts the body and impacts the brain, and how the brain impacts relational health. And really getting into a little bit of a deep dive on family of origin and how we were raised and our families that we were raised in could be impacting, not always bad, but who we have become. And is that who we are supposed to become, right? So it's a big conversation about relational health, and not just relational to each other, but our relationship with ourself. So join us in the conversation with Bob Hamp. All right, welcome back.
Well, thanks.
It wasn't that long ago that we were together. We're still in the same clothes.
But I'm sure it seems like it.
It seems like it to other people. But wow, we had such a great starting conversation just about the brain and how it does impact physical health and how our physical body can impact the brain, that whole thing. And if you guys didn't hear that or watch it, it's worthy to go back because it's important to kind of understand. But another aspect of whole body health that I believe also isn't addressed a lot, especially in the medical world, is our relationships.
Oh, my word.
And relationships are, everything. I mean, it can impact how we take care of our bodies or destroy our bodies as well, right? If we let it.
Yeah.
So as a marriage and family therapist, licensed, of course, I know this is obviously an area of interest for you and something you work on, but you've talked in the past before, and it's been a big topic in the workplace for us when you come.
Yeah.
Which people might think this is weird, but it's so important to understand. I know you'll get there, is family of origin and how it relates and how it develops relationships and how it causes us to chase the same type of relationships, whether we want to or not, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah.
And how that impacts this whole brain thing. So that's really all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Let's tie it all together because when you talk about body, soul, spirit, when you talk about physical health, and in that previous show, we said that, mental health is physical health, emotional health is physical health, because there's chemicals and electrical, interaction that's taking place in physical spaces. What a lot of people don't recognize is just how concretely relational health is physical health. Mm-hmm. Gabor Mate wrote a book called, I think I've got this correct, When the Body Says No.
Yes.
It's a really famous book about, the body keeps a score, but his is When the Body Says No. And it's an incredible combination of his training in marriage and family therapy and his medical practice, where he shows again and again what we think are physical causes to illness without really examining the relationship issues. The physical causes only contribute to the illness. A significant part of what causes illness is the relational patterns in the patients that he sees.
I've said this earlier before we, between on break, but my ideal clinical campus would include, clinicians, medical doctors, nurse practitioners, physicians, assistants, all that, and chiropractic care, because I think that's a key aspect too, a clinical nutritionist to help us understand nutrition and all of that, and even a clinical chef that could teach us how to shop and cook and eat whole foods. But marriage and family therapists, relational coaches are it's just as vital as all of those other things. And then, of course, some spiritual counseling as well, which you do both of. But that really, to me, would encompass a campus of whole body health and disease prevention, because if you can work on all those things, we wouldn't even have all the issues with chronic disease.
And health development.
Health development. I love that. And it would start from infancy. I've had a pediatric chiropractor on here talking about, how things happen in the birth canal and birth trauma and how that impacts the nervous system of a child all the way through, even causing ADD and ADHD and all these kinds of things. So it would be from infancy. And actually, it would even be, let's go further than that. Let's go to conception and prenatal all the way through the end of the lifespan. So
when it's if we think about it kind of in its building blocks.
I just put something out in the universe, by the way.
I heard that.
We'll see what's going to happen.
I hear that, and I feel you putting that out there. So I've dreamed of that, too, because you look and you go, we need someone to cover all these bases, because the person sitting in front of me, we all to some degree are those, if you give everyone a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yes.
To some degree, I've got my hammer, you've got yours. But if we get a whole construction crew, we can maybe come up with a complete building. So if we look back at this, and I'll give a quick overview just in case someone didn't see it. From the bottom up, the bottom half of the brain is designed to keep us not dead.
Right.
It's all about survival. You're not going to produce a full and abundant life. You're not going to produce rich relationships. You're not going to produce creative works of art or even creative works of building systems and cities and businesses. You're just going to survive. And sometimes survival may mean building some things or doing some things, but the richest version of who we are comes from the top half of our brain when we're in survival. And as we said in that episode, most people are, until they decide to become conscious enough and learn to wake up and get out of the matrix and start to really make connections to what am I here for? Who am I really? When we live in survival, all we do is we kind of charge our body with adrenaline, cortisol, which then tells the brain, be prepared for an emergency. And we live that way when we've got this cycle going on. We live in this bottom part just saying every day is requirement, obligation, survival. And the bottom half of the brain is just filling us with these chemicals that keep the body sick, if not do damage to the organs.
Yeah. Can I just ask one question before we move up?
Yeah.
Would you say, I think about this since I've learned this work for as long as I've learned it from you over the last year. We kind of automatically are here. Like, does anybody ever just wake up and they're here? I feel like I always have to be conscious to go here.
Yeah.
Or who gets to do we ever get to the point where we just wake up and we're here? I guess you're God. I don't know.
So this is I hadn't really thought that through, but I think when we're little children,
yeah, that's true. When everything's...
There's a part of that, where Jesus says, you've got to become like a little child. I think there's some very practical things in that statement.
Yeah.
And we always kind of tie that to simple faith, but I think it's way more than that.
Yeah.
I think little children live connected all day long.
Yeah.
They're in the moment that they're in. They're fully present in that moment. And they may be obnoxious in the moment, but they're in the moment.
Until they start to learn fear.
Right.
Or things have happened to them as small children.
Fear, obligation.
Yeah.
Start to respond to the expectations of the world around them. And it drives us down here. It's early on, we come into the world pretty uninhibited, pretty free to just what comes to us, comes through us. We eat it, it comes out the other end.
We want it, we scream for it, we get it.
Yeah. And so I think we live pretty connected, but over time, we start to have these demands put on us that we live up to expectations, that we follow through on certain obligations, that we must do certain things. And so we start to slide down here to where we're living from the fulfillment of the appetite of not wanting to fail.
Right. And, I've talked about this with a couple of other guests, just from a practical perspective of how even the modern day child is, in 3 sports and taking extra academics after school. And, so we kind of start this pretty young. We're starting pee-wee football now, at 3-4 years old, And
what we think and believe is the harder we work, the more we'll succeed.
Or we'll create this. If we put this kid in all these sports, we're going to create some,
the next superstar.
Yeah.
He's athletic, he's going to take over the NBA or the...
But what we're really doing, what I'm hearing you say, is we're bringing them from here into here.
Yeah. I've got a really good friend of mine who, and I'm trying to think how to tell the story without telling the story. I just realized how hard this would be. Spent his entire first 20 years of his life working hard to become an NFL player and made it.
Wow.
And then was drafted. He was drafted by an NFL team. And your question, one day he said, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Like, am I doing this because I love it?
Right.
Because it's in me? Am I doing this? Or have I gotten on the train and I've done all the camps and I've done all the drills and I've gone through all the college preparation. I've done all the things and I'm here. Is this what I'm created for? Mm-hmm. He literally woke up one day. And a lot of times, again, to your question, I think sometimes people get to a place where their life starts to not work. And they ask the question, why not? Mm-hmm. Or they have a crisis of some sort and they say, how did I get to this crisis? Yeah. And that may wake them enough to go, okay, I'm at least connected to my pain or to my fear. And if I connected to myself and stay connected to myself, maybe I can come up with a new course in my life, a new direction.
Right.
For him, he really took the time to stay there. Every kid's dream, he quit the team, started a new career path, and is now doing the thing he's dreamed of ever since then. And happy, satisfied, he's living the life he wants to live now, having chased what he thought he, and here's the key, ought to.
Yeah.
He ended up with what he ought to have, but not what he's created for.
It's good. Love it.
So the other story that goes through my mind when we kind of tie back to the Gabor Mate book and the idea of physical health, this was a real education for me, Terri. Back in the 90s, I started my practice in 1993. And somewhere in the late 90s, I'll never forget this. I had a woman come in, had a doctor who would refer people to me often. And he would send people, and I always go, what is he asking me to do with this person? But this person clearly had this ongoing chronic pain. Fibromyalgia was the diagnosis, but it was more kind of a mystery chronic pain. We began,
I see a lot.
I imagine. I think it's living here.
Right.
And you've got that revving engine below the hood all the time. We began down a path in the very first session of just asking her the question, who are you? Literally just pressing that question to say, listen, I know what your profession is. I know what your name is. I know what your address is, but who are you? And she really had a moment as she began to ask that question and answer it. I don't know how else to say it, but this, her pain went away in that session.
Wild.
And didn't come back till 8 weeks later.
Wow.
Now, here's the progression of those 8 weeks.
Right.
And I see this more often than you might think now that I've seen it once.
Can't unsee it.
Right. So she began to tell people, man, my pain's gone away. And she attributed both to like her discovery of who she was and her connection to her creator. And, she was really starting to tell people, well, her spouse didn't like the attention she was getting. And he began to say, why do you keep talking about that? You wouldn't think that's how a spouse would respond, right? But clearly there was some problem that he was, and I started recognizing in my work with her that he had some issue with coercive control. But she was feeling so good, she was just, unplussed by it. She just kept going. But about week 6, she started to go, I'm just going into this headwind, and I'm being resisted by him every step of the way. Maybe I should just give in and stop talking about it. And the week she gave in and stopped talking about it, her pain started to come back.
Wow. It's amazing.
Now,
it's a beautiful example of how the brain and the body work together.
She leapt to the top of her brain. Remember in the last show, we talked about this is the part of the brain where we experience identity. She leapt to the top of her brain, had this kind of connection where she realized who she was. And the release of these chemicals, the settling of these chemicals, I'm sure gave her some relief. But I also think just a clear sense of I'm more than I thought I was. But then she starts in the tug of war with her abusive spouse, begin to go, I'm not going to let it in. I'm not going to let it in. I'm not going to let it in. And then it gets here, right up against her, and she lets it in. And the next day, the pain's in here again.
Yep. Wow.
And I think what happens is she's in this part of her brain, but again, whether it be an abusive spouse or the expectations of a job or just the life we've created living down here, there's a consistent pressure on us to stay in the loop of normal.
Yeah.
And if normal includes being physically sick, getting out of that, we're going to face a headwind for a little while.
Yep.
So I think one of the things that happens here is if we take her story and a dozen other stories and we look here and we say, what led her to be in that cycle of my body tells me I'm in pain, my midbrain keeps feeding me the dopamine for all my looking for help with that. If we look back at where she got into her first relationship of coercive and control, it started in her family of origin. And that's the thing you were saying a couple minutes ago.
Correct.
The thing I've told your employees for a long time is we are all repeating our family of origin patterns until we're not.
Right.
It's often so unconscious.
Yep.
And sometimes it's because we may have had a father that was alcoholic, and we've married somebody who's never had a drink, and then we start to realize, but they are addicted to their job.
Yeah.
And the first moment that dawns on people, it's like I thought I found the opposite of my dad, my mom,
right, whoever.
And it's like the opposite is really the same thing.
Right.
When you look in the mirror, you see the opposite of your face.
Yep, that's right.
But it looks just like you.
Yep.
So people look for opposites and they marry that, but they end up actually marrying into the repetition of their family pattern.
Yep.
That's a direct function of the midbrain telling you, here's what you need. We learn in that family of origin, like I use the example.
And safe, right? I mean, it's familiar.
Yeah. Whether safe or not, if danger feels familiar,
it can feel safe.
Right. It's why people live a life of ongoing harmful behavior, self-harmful behavior, is if they've not felt safe, they mirror back to themselves the life that they lived on the outside. So the midbrain gets an idea of what's normal and says, crave what's normal, and I'll give you some dopamine. So if the normal is self-harm, I hear people say all the time, when I cut myself, I feel relief. Well, they literally are cutting their flesh, but getting a hit of dopamine.
Yep.
You know my wife's story. She was sexually abused as a child and talked about the years of promiscuity that followed that in her teenage and early 20 years. And what's happening is lots of self-harm behaviors,
right,
but a flood of dopamine every single time.
Absolutely.
And so this isn't always about pleasure. It's about normal. So in our family of origin, we get a sense of what's normal.
Normal, air quotes.
Yeah, even when what's normal in your family is abnormal in a broader cultural sense.
Interesting. Are you looking for a healthcare provider who understands the importance of integrative medicine? Avexius Health Solutions is changing the way we approach wellness. We train practitioners on cutting-edge therapies focusing on a preventative care model. If you're ready to take a proactive approach to your health, Avexius can help you find a provider who's right for you. Just head to avexius.com. That's EVEXIAS.com and click on the button Find a Provider to find a provider near you. So let's just kind of break it down for just tangible kind of examples of how our family of origin patterns. Explain what family of origin. Let's just start there.
Yeah.
What do you mean by family of origin?
Yeah. So the family you were born into, or if you were adopted, the family that the primary shaping years of your life, those developmental shaping years from like 0 through 8,
right,
make such a deep imprint. There's an old saying: the reason your parents can push your buttons so much is because they installed them.
Yeah.
And so the longer, the earlier in your life, and the longer you live to a certain circumstance, it creates your picture of what's real. Like we said, the brain tells the nervous system.
Yeah.
If the nervous system agrees, we call that real, even when it's fake. I feel like my dad doesn't love me. Well, dad's, got his own issues, and love or no love. My body says, yeah, see, he doesn't love you. That becomes my reality, whether that's true about my dad or not.
Right.
If that becomes my reality, and so when we talk about family of origin patterns, I think of our family that we grew up in or were raised in as like a jigsaw puzzle. Everyone's a uniquely shaped piece, but each piece fits together uniquely. And as they fit together, it creates one whole picture. And so the picture of your family, you may have fit into your family in a particular way. When you leave your family, you still look like that puzzle piece.
Yeah.
So the best way for us to look at that is birth order.
Yes, we've talked about birth order.
Yeah, so birth order, again, these are some stereotypes, and you could always find the exceptions. But if you think of an oldest, middle, and youngest child, an oldest child is typically considered kind of a bit over-responsible, a bit serious, because they haven't really had the time to develop or the freedom to develop a sense of humor. They always feel like they're supposed to take care of other people. A middle child typically is called the lost child because they're not the oldest and they're not the youngest, so they don't have a specific role. So they kind of disappear into the fabric of the family. And the youngest child, you'll know in a second which one I am. The youngest child is what I call the last cute one. Right?
That's true.
They're the last, parents take pictures of the baby, and there's the last one who's a baby gets to be a baby longer than all the others.
Of course.
And so the youngest child is often known as like the court jester. They're the one that if there's pressure in the family or tension in the family, they'll make a joke or do something cute and adorable to get distraction. Whereas the oldest child may feel responsible. And the middle child is like, well, I'm going to go to my room and read a book. So if there's tension in the family, each person plays out their role as an expression of the larger family of origin pattern.
Interesting. And that is telling us who we are. And so that's where we live until we're able to connect that maybe that's not who we are designed to be.
Right.
And jump up to the top.
Fulfilling that role gives us a shot of dopamine.
Yep.
And we don't even consciously think of it. We just think, I feel better when I make people laugh. I feel better when I have people's attention.
I feel better when I fix something.
Exactly. Well, that's down here too, right? And it's all those things. Here's my natural inclination in a group of people or in a crisis or, whatever it is. My quote unquote natural inclination in many cases is actually trained into us by those early and ongoing family of origin interactions.
Yep.
So that oldest child who feels like I've got to fix things, it's my responsibility. Often in any group, whether it's still their family of origin or a work setting or, they're in school and they're doing a group study project, they're the one who's going to take charge, make sure everybody does the work.
You're describing me to a T.
You're welcome.
I've always risen to the top and been a leader in every job I've had or a manager. I was a manager when I was 17 years old. Yeah. But, and that's always, you're all proud of that, but it's really just kind of my place in the family and how that happened. That's interesting. It's worked for me.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's not you.
Yeah.
It just means it's worth taking a look.
Yeah.
Because there's an upside and a downside to all those things.
Oh, it's exhausting.
So kind of a downside to the youngest child, which would be me, is typically youngest children have a hard time, like we're not the one who rises to the top. We're not the one who takes responsibility because the oldest child's going to take responsibility. Yeah. Well, I'm 62 years old. At some point, I had to take a look and go, I'm not a youngest child anymore.
Yeah.
That may have been where I was born into my family.
Right.
But I've got some responsibilities in life that are nobody's responsibility but mine.
So pulling this whole conversation, you were, I always like to kind of pull it back to just the relational health is what we're talking about and how relationships impact our physical body to a huge degree. And, let's pull this whole family of origin conversation back up to how does that play out in all of our relationships? Does it play out in work relationships, in, not only marriages, but in even how you parent? I would imagine it kind of plays out everywhere. And then how do we know when to recognize maybe some unhealthy patterns that we've brought into relationships that might need to have some tweaking?
Yeah, such good questions.
And so little time.
Because this is a day-long conversation.
Yeah, I know.
It's actually a 2-year conversation. So if everybody's repeating their family of origin patterns until they're not, what I always say is that everyone's family is normal until you leave it and look back at it.
Right.
Because normal is defined by what you experience every day. So someone who grows up in a family that's, let's just say kind of worst case scenario, ongoing sexual abuse from family members that's both, perpetrated and hidden by family members. That's normal to you if that's all you know. Mm-hmm. And until you get out of that and look back at that, you just assume that's what normal life is. Mm-hmm. Well, that's an extreme setting, but in every one of our families, because I've done this family systems therapy for 30 plus years now, everyone's family is like its own culture. Mm-hmm. And it defines normal for you, and it defines normal for you, like who are you and what's your place in the world and what's normal life. And there's two answers to your question. Your first question was, how do we know when it's time to do something about that? And the first one is something goes wrong.
Like?
Well, let's pick kind of the obvious one. I get married and my wife is not my mother.
Yes.
Wait, you're not catering to my every whim. You don't think I'm special. You're not taking care of this young.
Or you want me to be your mother in some ways, but not in other ways.
Right. And so in a new normal, we've created a new family, our family of procreation.
Yeah.
And I have an expectation that I didn't even know I had.
Yeah.
That, my mom taught me how women interact with me.
That's right.
And my wife didn't seem to go along with that.
Yep.
And so you've got a couple years of adjustment where both of you have to go, you're not doing this right. And the thing we have to begin to ask is, and I've described it this way, if I've got a bruise on my foot and I step on the floor, did the floor hurt me? If I have a bruise and the pressure from the floor hurt me, but the bruise is in me.
Right.
And so we have to be able to shift from did my spouse hurt me? Or do I need to look at me and ask the question, what are the things I carry with me that my relationship with my spouse or my coworkers or whatever is revealing? In every setting, we really need to ask the question, are they doing something harmful to me? Or did I bring a bruise or set of bruises into this that our newly growing relationship is putting pressure on and exposing something in need for me to take a look at?
Yeah.
And the answer to some degree is yes.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, the person that has, gets fired from that job and fired from that job and fired from that job, or has that failed relationship, that failed relationship, that failed relationship. At some point, you kind of got to go, well, the common denominator is me.
Yes.
So what am I bringing in maybe? And that's a vulnerable place to get to, but it almost feels so honest that it's like, okay, now maybe I can get somewhere and quit reliving the same pain over and over in a different scenario.
I heard one person say a while back that, the real intelligence is the ability to unlearn.
Yeah, that is true.
It's one thing to go out there and consume a lot of information and really become intelligent. It's another thing to go, what have I learned that's wrong?
Yeah.
And that I've carried all this time as if it's good information that may actually be just bunk.
Well, and to even go further with that thought, I think so much of us have a lot of head knowledge that isn't really embodied. I have a lot of head knowledge. I've read so many self-help books or whatever you want to call them. So there's a lot of knowledge up here, but how much of what we learn that could be helpful translates into actual, doings. It's just like our knowledge of, we know eating certain ways and exercising does a certain thing, but until we embody that.
Well, and there are ways that we can put this here, right?
Right.
So we learn information, we get a dopamine hit from learning it. We pass a test, we say it on a podcast, we sound super smart.
Yep.
But then the reality is, what are we living out outside the door, out from behind the microphones? Where are we really turning on the faucet of oxytocin?
Yeah.
That doesn't happen until we, to use the word you did, embody it.
Right.
Knowing it only feeds the intellectual system, but doesn't feed the day-to-day life. It doesn't.
So
we could put it in these terms: the head and the heart. Even though both of these really live inside the cranium, this is really the way we kind of, and it doesn't have to be, by the way. You can know information up here, but if you know information up here, it's also going to create a natural experience. It's like the teacher who says, hey, I want to teach you about markers. Hold this marker. And now you're not just hearing me describe it, but you feel the marker and you can, it's like I heard the story one time about how rabbis teach. And they told the story about, a rabbi shows up one day with the little kids in the rabbi school, whatever that would be, takes a bunch of little squares of wax paper and a little jar of honey. And he puts a little dip of honey on every square and hands it out to the kids. Says, each one of you taste that, or each one of you hold that. And as soon as I start to read, just lick the honey off the wax paper. And starts to read the verse that says, taste and see that the Lord is good. And as he does that, they all take a lick. He's making the teaching, he's making the learning, not just data that feeds our sense of smartness, but rather it becomes
experience.
They're connected to the taste as they recognize that he's saying something that's sensory and not just intellectual.
So good. So good. Well, there's a lot of ways we can go on this. I think that having some future conversations around, getting to that who we're designed to be is going to be a great conversation. But recognizing, I think, just these last, the one where we really went deep into the brain, and this one, the things that are just kind of coming up for me is really just, again, still recognizing that there may be some patterns that we are engaging in every area of our life that kind of maybe came from our family puzzle piece that we were a part of.
Yeah.
And just examining that, do some of these need to maybe shift a little bit? And am I here? And how can I get here?
Yeah. And if we don't decide to shift it, sometimes life will make it.
Life will shift it for us.
Yeah. So just marriage and life will sometimes just put it right up in your face and say, hey, this won't work if you keep going this direction.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all you do and all you bring, because it is such again, I can't emphasize enough that we have to start looking at our bodies not in these silos of, mental health is different than my heart health, than my, bones and muscles. Like, it's all connected, my nervous system. And I think that the more we start to kind of connect these dots, because I've talked in other programs about how certain foods we've talked about how foods impact this whole thing, and how some foods, a lot of foods, especially nowadays, they're designed to keep us here in this dopamine hit, and we're not able to jump up out of that into connection, right? How even social media is designed to keep us here and just keep us isolated and not connecting. And it's a fake connection that I think people aren't talking about enough, because we think we're connected because it's a social connection, but you're not connected to anything there.
Quite the opposite. It's a counter for connection. This kind of thinking and understanding the brain and the central nervous system is incredibly helpful for the work that we do. But put it in the hands of marketers.
Right.
Put it in the hands of people who are trying to sell you anything they can sell. Yeah. It's deadly information. Yeah, for sure. And I think if anybody watches The Social Dilemma with these original creators of some of these things, they recognize that. So there's so much more we could talk about. I think the conversations will keep going, but I like to pull it back and have these broad conversations so we can dig deep into other conversations in the future. So thanks for being here. Oh, thanks.